saw the ice caves a little earlier. So Dragonblight itself is one of our largest zones in Northrend. The zone size, I think you'll find it somewhat similar to Outland as far as the scale and the scope of the zones, but Dragonblight specifically here is definitely one of our larger zones. When you have a large zone, it's pretty important to break up the spaces, make sure there's enough horde bases, there's enough alliance bases. You don't want people running too far to their quest givers. You don't want graveyard runs to be too long. Those are all the things we can figure out here on these maps when we start out early. So, what about the capital city? Where's our Shatrath? Where are we going to go to bind and do things? Where do you want to go to kind of set up your home base? So, this place might look familiar. So, Dalaran will end up being the capital, kind of the home city for Northrend. And so, it's going to be on the move a little bit. So basically, you see, Dalaran's going to be taking off and making its way up to Northrend. The Kirintor, who are inhabiting Dalaran, holding up what they're doing, they want to basically set up a final front against the Blue Dragonflight. Blue Dragonflight, ever since Malagos kind of lost his head, they're pretty much against all magic users in all of Azeroth. And the Kirintor obviously are into magic, that's their whole thing. So they're moving Dalaran up to kind of take a stand and, he'd be there and so they can be right in the forefront of the fight. And so Dalaran is going to be our home city for that. So it's going to be floating above, in the air, above the zone. Now you'll be able to access it from the ground or from flying mounts, either way. Here's a little view of where Dalaran's going to be. It's going to be really centrally located in Northrend. It's super accessible. We learned a lot from Shatrath, where its placement was and how that worked out. We wanted to take what we learned there and apply those theories here, but also just steep the city just like Shatrath, a ton of lore, and really make it a cool place for people to bind and camp out and be able to access their vendors and do stuff they need to do. So now, Tom Chilton's going to talk a little bit about the new Death Knight class and our PvP improvements.
Hi there, everyone. So, of course, with the impending addition of Gnome Death Knights, we're going to have ways to stomp those Gnome Death Knights. So we'll talk a little bit about some of our new PvP features. And what we're starting off here is with the addition of siege weapons. So, siege weapons are something that we've been talking about for quite some time, and we're ready to really introduce those into the game in a way that both can affect the outdoor world and into Battleground. So what we're expecting to do is we're going to have a new Battleground where players will be able to acquire siege vehicles, drive them around, blow up buildings, all that sort of thing, the kind of things you'd expect. Nice, fast-paced sort of environment. And in addition, something we'll be talking about a little bit later is that we're going to be adding an entirely new type of outdoor world zone. So we're going to have an outdoor world PvP zone, and this zone will be really very dedicated toward PvP activity, both in terms of capturing objectives in the world PvP and then having it impact the entire game world, or at least Northrend. So as I mentioned, to go along with that, both in the Battleground and in this outdoor environment that we're talking about, you're going to be able to blow up buildings. And so in fact, we know for the Battleground, the primary objective is going to be able to blow up the enemy base. So that's what you're going to have to do to win. The more you blow up, the more honor you'll score. So this new Battleground is going to be, something that players are going to be able to get into very quickly, a lot like our other Battlegrounds. For example, like Arathi Basin. We're currently expecting to build it to be about a 15-person Battleground on each side. So it's something that groups of a variety of different sizes will be able to get into. And hopefully we'll be able to get that Battleground so that it takes typically around 30 minutes to 40 minutes at most. So you have a pretty good quick play experience where you can just zip in there, get some siege weapons, blow each other up, tear down other people's siege weapons, blow up buildings, and have a good time overall. In addition to the new battleground, we expect to add a new arena season that includes a new arena map, all the new kind of gear that goes along with that to support the PvP itemization, and also the actual new arena map itself. And finally, as I mentioned, we're going to have this non-instance PvP zone called Lake Wintergrass. So that should be something really kind of new for us, because even on the PvE servers, this is going to be a PvP zone. So if you're playing on a PvE server, you'll know that if you go here, that's what you're looking for. A lot like when you enter into a battleground from a PvE server. So everybody's going to have an opportunity to go there to get some pretty crazy outdoor PvP action and see who ends up coming out on top. This shows the location of the exterior zone, Lake Wintergrass. It's kind of pretty centrally located. We want players to be able to get to it pretty quickly from anywhere. And also it's supposed to kind of illustrate how this central zone is going to actually extend its impact across Northrend as a whole. So next what I'd like to talk about is the introduction of our new character class, the Death Knight character. So as you can see here, the Death Knight is going to fulfill a couple of roles. We see them as, much like the Warrior, they're a tanking DPS hybrid. However, we expect that they'll be able to tank using two-handed weapons or dual wielding. There's no need for any wussy shields here. You're not going to see a Death Knight running around with a little board, you know. Arthas threw that away. Slap you in the face if he sees you with one. Here's some concepts of some of the new kind of weaponry that we're introducing. Death Knights are going to be very oriented around bladed weapons. Obviously, one of the things we'll be talking about in more detail is the relationship a Death Knight has with his rune weapon. Typically, in a lot of Warcraft lore, such as the art that you see with Arthas, you see him with a big two-handed sword, his rune blade. We're also going to extend that to other things such as axes. So you'll be able to kind of pick and choose whether or not you want to be the crazy axe guy or the big sword guy. Or the little sword gnome or whatever, you know. Wears plate armor, big bulky craziness, just like Arthas sitting there in the background. So here's some concept art that our artists have been working on for the Death Knight. Very kind of intimidating, imposing, sinister kind of look and feel. Rawr. And so the Death Knight's going to use a mix of spells and abilities. So one of the things that's going to differentiate the Death Knight from a Warrior is not only the resource system, which I'll explain later, since the Death Knight doesn't use Rage, for example. The Death Knight's also going to be a little bit more caster-oriented. What I mean by that, I don't actually mean that they stand back and they cast time spells. What I mean is that they are going to be kind of using a lot of non-melee physical types of spells and abilities. So even though they'll be in your face, beating your head in with their bladed weapons, they're also going to be using spells such as Army of the Dead, stuff like that. Army of the Dead. Write it down. Okay. And something that we mentioned, of course, is that the Death Knight is World of Warcraft's first hero class. And what that means to us is that we're introducing the Death Knight in a different way than we would normally would a different kind of character class. You aren't going to actually start off with Death Knight as a level 1 character. We actually felt like with some of these really kind of strong archetypes from the Warcraft 3 game, that we wanted to make it feel a little bit more epic than that.